much. Very good. All right. So we are actually.
I invited. I love that place.
So listen, when you pray us out,
What
you can pray a blessing on them, and just remember they didn't invite you, so keep that in mind when you bless them.
Congratulations.
Thank you. All right. So we're going to be in Exodus chapter 33 today. And as I was looking at the passage, I was planning on 34 and then finishing next week. But as I looked, I'm like, no, we can actually do all 7 chapters and finish tonight. We'll be done with Exodus tonight. We'll be done.
I just started it.
So you guys have to do 2 things while you listen and study Exodus tonight. You also have to think about what you want to do next week. So think about the passages you want to do. If you want to go right into the Testament book, we've done like a couple of Old Testament books in a row. Do you want to take a break, do a New Testament thing? I think we did, was it Galatians last time, and then Exodus. So if you want to do something New Testament, we can, and then flip back over into Leviticus, or we can do another book entirely. Y'all just think about it for a minute and decide after the Bible study, all right? All right, Exodus 33. Let me give you, just as we're finishing, a recap of the book as a whole, all right? Without going super detailed. Basically, it opened up. We picked up where we left off in Genesis. So at the end of Genesis, remember, Joseph dies in Egypt, and all of his family's in Egypt, right? So 400 years later, we find out that now we're in Exodus. The Joseph's family has become so large. Remember that the Pharaoh's like, okay, so there's too many people for us now. We're going to enslave them to keep them under control. And so that's where the whole Moses story happens, and he gets delivered, and he ends up being raised in the family and ends up trying to save the people himself, gets run out of town because they discover his murdering of one of the Egyptians. He's away for 40 years. And after he's an old man, now he's 80 years old. Then God's like, all right, now I'm going to use you to save the people. Like, what are you talking about, God? How are you? This is important in a minute. Why would you use me? Like all the excuses he gave. And so God says, no, I'm going to use you anyway. Sends it back to X, sends it back. And then that's the context for the 10 plagues. God says, let my people go. The whole purpose of that was to demonstrate both to the Israelites and to Pharaoh and to the Egyptians who this one true God is. They finally get away. That's when you have the parting of the Red Sea. God totally closes the door behind them, so to speak, washes the Pharaoh away, washes the army away. Now they're on the other side. It's just them and God, right? So they go to the temple, they go to the mountain, and they're there. They get their 10 commandments and all the things they're supposed to do, and they obeyed, and everyone lives happily ever after, right? No. While Moses was up there getting all those commandments, at this point, they've already had a meal with God. They're looking at God. They're having a fellowship meal. God, we're going to do this. We like this plan. You're going to be our God. We're going to keep all the rules. And God's like, all right. And so they're making all the plans while Moses is up there getting the plans, the tabernacle, all that kind of stuff, right? What do the people do while Moses is up there getting the rules from God? You remember? They made a golden calf. And they said, yeah, forget God as Moses is following. And this is really God. This is the God who saved you. Even though the whole point of the 10 plagues was to show Israel who the one true God really is. Like, no, this is your real God. And God's like, oh no, that's not really you, right? So God basically threatens to end them all, starter with Moses. And that's where we'll end up last week, where Moses intercedes, and Moses says, no, let's not. He says, stands between them and says, if you're going to kill them, you got to kill me too. For the first time, and Moses is like, he finally takes on the role of intercessor, right? He's now standing between the people. And that's where God says, fine, I'm not going to take with them. I'm not going to end you. I will save them for your sake. I will judge the specific people who committed the sin with the golden calf. And he does. And that's where we're left off, right? Okay. So now we're in chapter 33. Let me just read the first several verses if I can. 33, chapter 1. The Lord then spoke to Moses, depart from me, go up here, you and all the people whom you have brought out of the land of Egypt, to the land which I swore to Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, saying to your descendants, I will give it. So he's sending them on to continue their trip back to the promised land, right? I will send an angel before you. This is setting you up for what's going to happen in Judges. Or Joshua rather, and Judges. I am sending an angel before you. I will drive out the Canaanites, the Amorites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. So who is going to, God got them out of Egypt. Who is going to take care of them when they get to the promised land? Who's going to do that?
My angel.
God is, through his angel. He's going to do through the angel. Go up to a land flowing with milk and honey. So there's all these blessings waiting for you, right? For I will not go up in your midst. Now, we've seen these kind of promises before, but now we have this. I will not go up in your midst because you are an obstinate people and I might destroy you on the way. Is God happy or not? Now, I think this is just worth pausing and noting. Is he promising them blessings or curses right here? In this whole passage, what's he been saying so far? It's kind of been good news, right? I'm going to deliver you. I'm going to send my angel. I'm going to bless you. But I'm mad at you. That highlights the lesson we learned way back in Genesis. I know there's this common view that God mad at you equals curses and God happy at you equals blessings. That's not what's in the text. God's not. Now, what he's not going to do is not going to go with you. He's not going to be in your midst. And so I'm still going to bless you, but that closeness that we're supposed to have, that's what's broken. And I want you to hear, that's this issue. It's the closeness that gets broken.
And is that what happened with us, right?
Yes.
Lord, money.
Yes.
Like God is still blessing us, but even if we're masking one on, kind of like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's, again, don't ever let anybody tell you that if you sin, therefore God has cut you off and he's going to destroy you. No, again, we saw that Jesus intercedes for that. But just because God's still blessing you, does that mean therefore that you're as close to him as you want to be, as he wants to be? No. And really, what's God, pardon the pun, honest to God, what's more important, your closeness to God or the blessings he's going to give you? So keep that in mind, right? So God still promises to go forward. When the people heard this sad word, it's interesting. He's just promised them all these blessings, but I'm not going to go with you. That makes the word sad, because what's the more important thing? God's very presence, right? Again, right here in the beginning of the text, we're told what's really important is the presence of God, not just all the stuff he gives us. When the people heard the sad word, they went into mourning, and none of them put on their ornaments. And this is a really nice tie back to chapter 2. What did they use to make the golden calf?
The golden.
All the ornaments, so all that stuff that had caused them, they had used to sin, they're getting rid of all of that. They're in mourning now. For the Lord had said to Moses, say to the sons of Israel, you're an obstinate people. I shall go up in your midst for one moment. Should I, then I would destroy you. Now, therefore, put off your ornaments from you that I may know what I shall do with you. Again, if the ornaments are what caused you to sin, let's kind of get rid of those. Okay. So the sons of Israel stripped themselves their ornaments from Mount Horeb onward. They were no longer decked out. Now, Moses used to take a tent and pitch it outside the camp, a good distance from the camp. And he called that the tent of meeting. And everyone who sought the Lord would go out to the tent of meeting, which was outside the camp. And when it came about, whenever Moses went out to the tent, that all the people would arise and stand, each at the entrance of his own tent, and gaze until Moses entered the tent. So what's the picture? It's time for Moses to have a conversation with God. He leaves the camp. He leaves the people. He goes in the sight, but far away, and the people stand. They don't go with him. Why not? Tie it back to this picture of closeness. What are they not? They're not close to God, not physically, not spiritually. Moses goes on their behalf, which makes perfect sense, because who saved their butts? Moses did, right? And again, this ought to give you pictures of Christ, right? So Moses, I mean, they didn't know his picture of Christ, but looking at the New Testament, you can see that parallel. So he's out there. Whenever Moses entered a tent, the pillar of cloud would descend and stand at the entrance of the tent, and the Lord would speak to Who? The people or to Moses? Moses. The Lord would speak to Moses. Again, it's this picture of closeness he has with Moses and not with them. When the people saw the pillar steadiness of the tent, all the people would arise and worship, each at the entrance of his tent. They can still worship God. They don't have that sense. Thus the Lord used to speak to Moses, and this is beautiful, face to face, just as a man speaks to his friend. Again, do you see how much the text is going into detail to paint this picture of who's got this intimate relationship with God and who does not?
Crazy. But it wasn't like a real like face to face, right?
No,
Because
and
Moses was
we're going to see that very soon to qualify that. But the point of the passage, that's a good description. The point of the passage is, do you see one is intimate and one is distant? One is intimate, one is distant. The issue has nothing to do with blessing. The issue has everything to do with intimacy. That's what the passage is. People who tell you you got to be obedient to God's will to go to heaven are missing the point. Heaven is a blessing. Listen, you get that by faith. That's it. But if you want to live this intimate walk with Christ, you want to know God, that's where you're looking for, okay? It's a relationship. So, you know the cliche, Christianity isn't a religion, it's a relationship, right? And this is, I don't have to say much, you should see that in your own lives. The people in your own lives, if you mistreat them, you gonna have a good relationship anymore? No. God's still a person. So it matters. And then when Moses returned to the camp, his servant Joshua, the son of Nun, a young man, would not depart from the tent. Setting up the picture of how important Joshua is, because let's skip ahead, who is Joshua going to be? Who do you think he's going to be? He's the one lead them to the promised land. God is kind of grooming Joshua to take over after, and we're going to see that in the book of Joshua going forward. So we're just kind of seeing little seeds being planted here, okay?
Was it in vain that these Israelites never got to go to the promised land? That he took them out of Egypt?
No, because again, no. So this is Exodus at Kadesh Barnea. But why do you remember? Why do this generation of Exodus? Why do they not get to go into the promised land? Because
lied and told them all that they're dying, you beat them, had no faith.
Yep.
So
God
we expect
offered,
a whole generation to die out.
God took them all the way to the land. They could see the land. He took them to the Florida border. They're at Valdosta. They're looking at Georgia, right across the state line.
After 40.
No, this is before the 40 years.
Oh.
He took them, we're going to see, not in this book, in Numbers. He takes them all the way up to the border. They're there. And God's like, all right, go get it.
So they just got out of Egypt, and this is probably a couple of days.
It's within 2 months.
This story is happening
Yeah.
within 2 months.
And then within a month or here, they're going to be at the promised land, at the border.
Yeah, if you ever Google map the area that they're in, I mean,
Yep.
you could probably walk it in 2 months, and that's why God said that they were to wander, which in the term, it's kind of a bad translation. Basically, it means you're just like, they're literally just killing time until he dies, essentially. And that's what they're doing. They're just walking around, just waiting for the time to be right.
Waiting on them to die. Yeah.
I mean, but yeah, so that was a lot of people would had problems with Exodus because they're like, why did it take them 40 years to do this? But I'm like, well, you say that because you haven't read it. Like,
right.
You know.
Yeah, if you look at a map, so what Jay is saying, if you didn't quite hear what Jay said, if you look at a map, you can walk that from Egypt up to Israel. You can walk that in a couple of months. And they did.
Mhm.
So what happens? They get all the way up there. And God says, all right, go get it. And they said no.
They wanted to wait.
No, they said no. They said, no, God is not going to save us. We don't believe God will do it. So God said, fine, if you don't believe it, then I won't. So God sends them back into the desert and they wander. And Jay is right. That word wander actually just means they just kind of roamed for 40 years. They weren't going anywhere. He just walked them around the desert until that entire first generation died because they rejected God, not the other way around. And then their kids, they're the ones that God took back to the promise and said, do you want it? Yeah, we like it and we'll go in. And then Joshua took them in.
Why were they so?
Why were they so stubborn? Figure it out and you'll figure yourself out, Miss Michelle.
Amen. Amen.
right?
Amen.
So then verse 12, then Moses said to the Lord, you say to me, bring this people up. Moses said to the Lord, you say to me, bring this people up. But you yourself have not let me know whom you will send with me. Moreover, you have said, I have known you by name, and you have found favor in my sight. Now, therefore, I pray you, he's talking to God, if I have found favor in your sight, let me know your ways that I may know you, so that I may find favor in your sight. Consider too that this nation is your people. What is this weird language he's doing? He's asking God, look, you know me. You've promised to be with me, but I need to know you. I need to see you. If you're telling me that it's my job to take them up there, this is too big a task for me. I need to know you. I need to know you. If this is what this is going to be, I need to have a deep knowledge of you, experiential knowledge. And he said, so God said, my presence shall go with you, Moses, and I will give you rest. Hear that. God's saying to Moses is going to get rest. Why? Moses still has to walk. So what's the rest God has in mind? It's this idea that he gets to relax in God's very presence and God's going to do it through him. Just relax. It's not you. So God's going to grant him his promise. You're going to have this intimate fellowship with him. Then Moses said to God, if your presence does not go with us, do not lead us up from here. For how then can it be known that I have found favor in your sight, I and your people? Is it not by your going with us, so that we and I and your people may be distinguished from all other ones who are upon the face of the earth? In other words, he's like, okay, God, you're going to go with us. If you're not going to go in front of us, we have a problem, because why are they going to follow me? We've already seen this as stiff-necked people. How are they going to follow me, right? How are they going to know that who we are? Then the Lord said to Moses, I will do this thing which you have spoken, for you have found favor in my sight, and I have known you by name. Can we just pause just for a second? Can you imagine God saying to you, sure, I'll give you what you want because you found favor in my sight? That's intimacy. Unless you think that that's not really truly possible. Sorry for skipping out of the book. The book of James, reflecting on passages like this, says the prayer of a righteous man accomplishes much. And righteous there does not mean everybody who's saved. In the book of James, it's someone who has walked with God. They have that intimate fellowship with God. You can say to God, have I found favor in your eyes? And God can say, yes, you have. That's no small thing. The prayer of a righteous man accomplishes much. I'm not trying to put anybody under anything here. This is all available to every one of us. It's just knowing God. So then this is Moses' prayer, Cosmo. I pray you show me your glory. Ooh, he went right for the big thing, right? Cheap old Solomon just wanted some wisdom. Moses wants the whole enchilada. He wants to see God. And so what does God say? I myself will make all my goodness pass before you. And I will proclaim the name of the Lord before you. I will be gracious to whom I will be gracious. I will show compassion to whom I will show compassion. And then he said, but you cannot see my face, for no man can see me and live. We'll come back to that in a second. So the Lord said, behold, there is a place by me. You shall stand there on the rock. And when it comes about, my glory is passing by, I will put you in the cleft of the rock. I will cover you with my hand until I have passed by. Then I shall take my hand away. You shall see my back, but my face shall not be seen. So he gets this profound view of God himself. He doesn't get to see God's face, but he really gets to see God's glory. And I hope that doesn't feel like a consolation prize. Just imagine for 1 second actually beholding God's glory, like really God's glory. Would anything else matter at that point? Nothing would matter at that point. Don't you think that's going to give Moses everything that he needs to go forward? If someone let me use some silly modern examples. I've seen God's glory. Someone cuts me off in traffic. Do I care anymore? I lose my job. Does somebody care anymore? No, nothing matters because all of a sudden God's goodness is, but why can't I see his face?
He's holy.
Mhm.
Yeah.
No matter how intimate we are with God, he is still God and we are still man. There's still an infinite chasm between us. So I can see God's glory, I can see his works, I can see his goodness, his love for me. But if I were to behold him directly, it would still end me because I am still but a man.
And when we get to heaven, we can, yeah.
Well, yeah, because in heaven, we're with Christ in Christ's image. And then the Bible does say we will see him face to face. But
Yeah,
that's
doesn't it say,
because, go ahead.
oh, I was gonna say, it doesn't say in Revelations after he builds the new heaven and the new earth, we'll literally be like walking with God, like,
Yes.
you know, we'll go out to Olive Garden, him and Jesus be at the next table, like stuff like
Yes.
that. You know what
Yep.
I'm saying? Yeah.
Seriously. Because at that point, we're resurrected with a new body, new flesh. We're not mere flesh. We are resurrected. And this is why the incarnation is so important. God himself becomes a man. That man dies. When the man is resurrected, he's resurrected. Jesus is resurrected, taken to heaven. Now, the human flesh in Christ is dignified. You're not raised merely in your body. You are raised in a glorified, incorruptible body. So that when you don't now merely see God's glory, but now you see and experience God's very presence face to face forever and eternity. That's what gets to wait for us. So in light of that hope, how do you live now? Like Moses, like the children of Israel. That's the picture we're being laid out for us. Now the Lord said to Moses, now we're going to, so I mentioned last week. So what's happening here is the covenant has been broken. It has to be reestablished, right? Remember, they broke the covenant. It has to be reestablished. Moses is close to God, very close to God, friendship to friendship. The people are as far off as they can be. How do these people who have broken faith with God, what do? The covenant has to be reestablished. It has to be fixed with the new mediator. The new mediator is Moses, who has now seen God's presence, seen God's glory. Cut for yourself 2 stone tablets just like before. I will write on the tablets the words that were on the former, which you shattered. By the way, there is a myth. I don't know where preachers got this idea from, that God wrote the first tablets and then Moses had to write the second tablets. That's not what the text says. The text says, cut for yourself 2 stone tablets. I will write on the tablets the words that were the former that you shattered. So this is still God's covenant, okay? Still God's covenant. So be ready by morning. Come up at the morning Mount Sinai. Present yourself there. Verse 3, no man has come up with you, nor let any man be seen anywhere on the mountain, not in the flocks. They're going to die otherwise. That all happens. Verse 5, the Lord descended the cloud. Oh, verse 6. Now the Lord passed in front of him and proclaimed, the Lord God is compassionate and gracious, slow to anger, abounding in love and truth, who keeps loving kindness for thousands, forgives iniquity, transgression, yet he shall not leave the guilty to go unpunished. So this is what God promised he would do for Moses, right? I mentioned this for last week. Let me just touch on that for 10 seconds now. This is the only time in the Bible where God declares his own attributes. If you ask a theologian who's been to seminary like me, what are the main attributes of God? We're going to give all these answers. Oh, you asked a theologian, you know, who's been to school, you know what we're going to say? We're going to say God is sovereign and God is holy and God is, God is simple and God exists. He has aseity and omniscient and omnipresent. Those are all fine, true. What does God declare about himself? He's gracious and compassionate. That's the thing. That's the thing. So if preachers want to get too caught up on the other stuff, that's not what God focuses on. Verse 10 and following, we're not going to read every verse, it's too many, but then God said in verse 10, behold, I am going to make a covenant. Before all people, I will perform miracles which have not been produced in all the days of the earth. All the people who live among you will see the workings of the Lord, for it is a fearful thing that I'm going to perform for you. Just be sure to observe what I'm commanding you this day. I will drive out the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, the Jebusites. And then he goes to go on and he's going to give basically a restatement of the 10 Commandments in short. He's going to talk about going on, don't make any false idols. When you see the false idols in Canaan, smash them. Keep the Sabbath. He's going to repeat all that. This is the same stuff as before. Why is he repeating himself before in brief? He's reestablishing his covenant. Do these people deserve to have their covenant reestablished with God? No. So why are they getting it? Because God is merciful, which he just declared for himself, right?
He declares here he's jealous.
Yeah.
So now we can say he's jealous.
He is a jealous God. And so in this context, what does jealous mean? Hopefully you've heard this before. If God himself says he's jealous, what does it mean that God is jealous?
I don't know. I only know my type of jealousy.
So what is your type of jealousy?
I don't know.
Yeah, but you're talking about-
Oh,
He's 3 minutes old.
I'm not cuckoo. I'm Cuban American. Am I even cuckoo?
I see Gretchen walking. This would never happen.
Yeah.
I see Gretchen walk down the street holding some other dude's hand, snuggling with him, giving a kiss on the cheek. How do I feel?
So
Jealous. Why?
that's your girl.
That's my girl. That's my wife.
Yeah.
That's my wife. Somebody's encroaching on my property. Terrible to say. Somebody slapped me. That's the idea, right? It's the emotion. Who cares? She's not my property. She's not mine, right? That's the emotion, right?
Yeah.
What is God saying? You're mine. You're mine. I don't want you giving yourself to somebody else, to some other God. I bought you. You're mine.
Probably stems from sadness.
Huh?
The jealousy
Yeah.
probably stems from sadness too, that it's like, I want to give you all these things and you're not allowing me to bless you.
Yes.
When I just want so badly to bless you. I want to help you.
Yes.
Be there for you. And you're breaking my heart.
Yes.
And so
And I think that's where people immediately equate God's jealousy with his anger, but I think sadness is the deeper part of it because everything God does, he does out of great. He wants to give to you.
when I'm worried, I'm gonna fight him.
Yeah.
When I'm sad, I'm gonna fight him. And I will go fix some butt
And-
because I'm not feeling the way I want to feel or being able to do what I want to do.
Yes,
It has
ma'am.
nothing to do with anger, but it's how I'm expressing.
And sometimes it comes out as anger. God is being pictured in extremely human terms here. He's being pictured as a husband. And he's like, I'm going to fight for you. I care about you. I want to take care of you and bless you. And then you're going to go chasing other gods? Really? Really? No. Now, we can back up and be theological. God doesn't need us, and that's all true. But really, whose benefit is this really for? Is this for God's benefit? What's for the Israelites' benefit?
The same play the harlot with God.
That's the language.
He doesn't need us, but he wants us, which is way better than. I feel like he's choosing us.
I'm going to give you one quick example historically. The Canaanite gods. You know what the worst thing that they demanded of their followers? The worst thing? To
Isn't it
sacrifice,
children?
like literally, their babies. They would take, this is true story. They would take their children. They would have these. They would cut. We found the archaeology. We've seen these. The gods of Chemosh and Marduk. They would carve them out of. They would these stone, basically fire pits. And inside the fire pits, it would be a metal god holding his hands out. They would pass their children through the fires. They would take newborn children. They'd light the furnace up, and they'd lay the children on the red hot metal hands, and they would play the drums to drown out the sound of the baby screaming.
I saw this thing, man, and it totally makes a lot of sense. It was this guy he was talking and he was explaining whenever the devil takes over a region, that is like the first thing, like all throughout history. That's the first thing that he almost demands is child sacrifice.
Yeah.
I mean, if you look at us, I mean, with abortion, we figured out how to just streamline it. That's all we did, We found the quickest and most effective way. And yeah, man, you're absolutely right about that.
There's all sorts of things that happen like that. And so the point is, when you follow God, when you're in intimate fellowship with God, he protects you from evil. And when you're not in intimate, does God suffer if I do evil? No. Who suffers? We do. So God is trying to protect you, trying to protect me. He's trying to protect us. That's the picture here. So his jealousy it's pictured as jealousy, but what it's really on a fundamental theological level, it's about God knows truly what will make you happy. And he knows that because he made you.
Mhm.
He really wants, and you say, I don't, God, I know it'll make me happy better than you. That's what it boils down to. That's what it boils down to. Okay, God, I said this before, I'll say it again. C.S. Lewis, I'll quote C.S. Lewis. God is the kind of God who either you will say to him, thy will be done, or he will say to you, thy will be done. And God help you if he says to you, thy will be done, because he'll give you what you want.
Amen.
And I'm going to tell you again, God will give you what you want. Beware.
Even if it's all you want.
Yes. So he goes and repeats that in the rest of chapter 34. He renews the covenant. And then you go to verse 29. And then we're going to go really fast. It came about that when Moses was coming down from Mount Sinai, Moses did not know the skin on his face was shining because he was speaking with God. When Aaron and all the sons of Israel saw Moses, behold, the skin of his face shone, and they were afraid to come near him. Then Moses called them, and Aaron and all the rulers of the congregation returned to him, and Moses spoke to them. Afterward, all the sons of Israel came near. He commanded them to do everything the Lord had spoken to them on Sinai. Then when Moses finished speaking, he put a veil over his face. But whenever Moses went in before the Lord to speak to him, he would take off the veil until he came out. And whenever he came out and spoke to the sons of Israel, whatever God had commanded, the sons of Israel would see the face of Moses, that again, his face would be shining. So Moses would replace the veil until he again went to speak with God. So what's this picture? Every time Moses goes in to talk to God, it's such a glorious experience that God's own glory shines off of Moses, and the people can't handle it. You still see the picture of distance. Moses is getting closer to God, and he's so close to God that he has to veil himself because the people can't handle it. But if nothing else, it's a mark. God is really with this man. You have to follow him because God's not going with them anymore like he did before. This is their evidence that God is following, but it's also a picture. When you're this close to God, when Moses is this close to God, God's very glory comes off of the man, so much so that it has to be veiled. The author of Hebrews, I believe, I've got my passage right, will make a big deal out of Moses having to veil himself and Christ does not veil himself. That's Hebrews. We can talk about that when we get to Hebrews. But again, the picture is the intimacy with God is so powerful that it shows in your very countenance, your very features. People can see, put it this way, people can see when you've been with God. Nobody cares 1-2 bits if you walk around acting like a good religious person. Nobody cares. But when you've been with God,
Glowing.
people will know.
Mhm.
So Moses has been elevated. All this started because he interceded on behalf of the people, right? Hear about how far Moses has come. He came from a guy who was arguing, God, I can't do this. Now he's so close to God that God's very glory is reflecting off of him. This should a glow up. It's so good.
Mhm.
This should remind you of the story of Abraham, who starts a pagan and ends up at the end of his life totally willing to follow God. We've watched Moses grow in faith the same way, and not only faith, but because he had faith, we've watched him grow in obedience.
Mhm.
The same we watched Abraham. Spoiler alert, does Moses do everything he's supposed to even until the end? No. We're going to see in Numbers he made a big mistake. But so it's possible even for Moses. But the point is, he's with God, right? That's where you want to be. Now, let me very, very quickly touch on the next 3 chapters with very, very little comment. If you have your Bibles, just flip through and look at some of the subjects. In chapter 35, he reemphasizes the Sabbath, which he already did before. He talks about the tabernacle workmen and all the gifts they're to build, which he did previously. He talks about the tabernacle, all of the gold they collected, which he already described in detail. This is all the same stuff. He talks about the construction, but where he said, I will give you the men. Here he gives the men to actually build the construction at the end of chapter 35. It's all the same thing. We read this, it would be all the exact same thing, the symbolism, the altars, the Holy of Holies, the 12, the gate at the beginning, the laver. It's all discussed yet again.
Can I ask the question?
Yes, go ahead.
Maybe I misunderstood. What are they to build? They're not building the temple, right? So what?
No, not the temple. They're building the tabernacle, which is the portable.
Okay.
And he went through this whole process back in chapter like 24 through 31, I think. He's repeating all the information because it never got built the first time. Now it's being built. And then in chapter 38, they build the tabernacle. Go ahead, what?
This is the like the portable one that they can move from site, right? Yeah.
Correct. Right. Yes. This is so they build the tabernacle in 38. It's all completed. Complete with, remember we talked about the priesthood, what the priest is supposed to wear. They're supposed to wear they like have to have the stones and the 12 stones, the Urim and the Thummim and all those sorts of things. All that is discussed yet again. Everything we saw in 24 up through what? 24 up through like what? 31, something like that. All of it is just repeated again, only now it's actually done. Why? Why is it just repeated? Well, again, what are we being emphasized? What had happened at, this is really important to grasp, what happened at the golden calf incident? What did they do at the golden calf? Really seriously. They broke the covenant. This is God reestablishing the covenant and actually being faithful to give them everything they needed. So despite their terrible sin, God is still keeping his end of the bargain. Despite their terrible sin, God is still keeping his end of the bargain. And can you just rest in that? The number of people who are, I'm having a debate with a guy on Friday night. He was going, his argument is going to be that if you sin bad enough, then God stops blessing you and you lose your salvation. That's his going to argument. No, there are things that you lose if you sin bad enough. It's not God's end of the bargain. 2 Timothy says very clearly, even if we are faithless, he remains faithful, for he cannot deny himself.
Where are you?
Can be.
Where are you doing this debate at? I would love
online. I will put the link. I'll put the link on WhatsApp so you can all watch it. It's live on YouTube.
Yeah, dude. Yeah.
And then in chapter 40, it's erected. I want to go flip over to chapter 40. I want to show you something real quick. Go all the way down to this is the end of the book, but I want to show you a few things. Let's skip down to verse 21. I'm just going to kind of just kind of mention a few verses, all right? This is the end of the whole process. Verse 21. So he, that is Moses, brought the ark to the tabernacle. He set the veil and the screen of the ark, just as the Lord had commanded. Verse 23. He arranged the bread in the order before the Lord, just the Lord had commanded. Verse 25. He lighted the lamps before the Lord, just the Lord had commanded. Verse 27. He burned incense, just as the Lord had commanded. Verse 32, when they entered the tent of meeting, when they approached the altar, they washed, just as the Lord had commanded. What are y'all picking up over and over and over again? They are finally reaching a place of obedience. That's what they're finally getting to. They are finally doing what God commands. Then, after all of this, contingent upon their obedience, then the glory, then the cloud covered the tent of meeting, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. Moses himself was not able to enter the tent of meeting because the cloud had settled on it, and the glory of the Lord filled the temple or the tabernacle. Throughout all their journeys, whenever the cloud was taken up over the tabernacle, the sons of Israel would set out. But if the cloud was not taken up, then they did not set out until the day when it was taken up. For throughout all their journey, the cloud of the Lord was on the tabernacle by day and by fire at night in the sight of all of the house of Israel. In other words, who's in charge? God. When he goes, they goes. When he stays, they stays. When God commands, they do. That's the picture. But again, this is all in the context of covenant keeping. They're already his people.
Especially like the morning, the cloud, and then at night, fire.
there's never a question if God is with them. They have the tabernacle, they have that, they have Moses, they have all that. God is always with them. The question is only, are they going to be obedient? And it's not be obedient so that God will be with them. It's be obedient because, why? God is with you. And I have good news. God is with you. So you can be obedient. And I have bad news for you. God is with you. You better be obedient. That's the idea. The Old Testament has never been about keep the law so that God will like you and you'll be saved. The Old Testament has always been God is with you. He is. Congratulations. Now, live like it. It's always been the point. Trust him and live like it. That's how Exodus ends. Leviticus is going to transition into, since God is with us, are we a holy people? How we're holy is through the sacrificial system. And then Numbers is going to be, were they in fact obedient? And the answer to Numbers is going to be no. And we'll see that when we get there. But that's where we leave off on this line. All right, so with that, we're done with Exodus. Questions, comments, cries of outrage.
This whenever I think of Exodus, like I always think about just how much easier it would be for all of us if we all just followed God's will, right? Because had they just stayed the course, Jesus would have came the day that he walked into Jerusalem on the donkey. From then on, everything would be good, but it's always
right.
Our sin and our free will that just kicks us in the pants. Every time I finish Exodus, that's like always my first thought is like how easy it would be if we could just get it together.
And can I really just propose that as the big question of the whole book? Just imagine, and this is a fantasy, just imagine if you always just obeyed God, whether you liked it or not, if you just obeyed God.
Yep.
What would life be like for you? It just would be better. And again, I'm not saying be religious, right? The Pharisees were extremely religious. I'm saying if you just walked with God, if you knew God, if you were obedient to God, if you did what he said, which for the Christian is faith in God. And then what's the two great commandments? Love the Lord your God with a heart, soul, mind, and love your neighbor. You just did that. Jay, what would our life be like, man?
If we all did that, Jesus would have showed up, walked into Jerusalem. We would have accepted him as a king. There'd been no Calvary. He'd been like, all right. He would have taken care of everything.
Yep.
And us being born now, we'd be living forever, I think.
Yeah, so do I. Every single time you sin or someone sins, it's because they just decided, and every time something's gone wrong, it's because someone just did this. No, I shouldn't say every time something goes wrong, because bad things happen. But when bad things happen, then, well, that's fine. That's another chance to love God and just trust him. That's what you do. Does that make it easy? No. Just trust him. Does God got you or not?
Mm-hmm.
Did God have was it easy for the people to be enslaved by the Pharaoh? No. Did God have them or not? I know trust is hard, y'all. I struggle with it myself. But that's the call of Exodus, call of the Bible. Just trust him. All right. Well, on that note, we can stay talk for a couple minutes. I'm going to end this recording. We are officially done with Exodus. Congratulations. You survived. Woohoo. You survived the whole law book. All right. We'll see whoever the next book, we'll figure that out now. God